Hey everyone, it's time for another Diablo 4 video. So I've been working on my renown, and while I was working on Hazar, I accidentally stumbled across a dungeon that just had a abnormally high amount of monsters and an abnormally high amount of elites in it. And I didn't really think too much of it other than I was like, wow, this density is amazing. Why aren't other dungeons like this? And then I realized, is this dungeon always the same? And I did another run of it and another run of it and realized this dungeon is always the same. The only real requirements they need to do this is to be level 50 or to be done with the story. Now, you can do this before level 50. You just need to be around level 35 to be able to do this dungeon. And you could just do this all the way from 30 to 100. But I really wouldn't recommend it until you get to World Tier 3. And ideally, you do this in World Tier 4 to benefit from the 100% increased experience that the monsters would give. The first half of the dungeon just has somewhere around 30 elites between the normal monsters that are there and the ambushes. You are going to find elites consistently in packs of 3 to 4. And every quarter or so of the first half of the dungeon you clear, more monsters will spawn on top of you, giving you more packs of 3 to 4 elites just randomly spawning on top of you. And because of all this dungeon actually ends up being the best dungeon in the game to farm. No matter how fast or slow your build is, you are still going to be killing monsters at proportionally the same speeds. And there's just absolutely nowhere else you can find this many elites at once. And elites are the most important thing for farming experience efficiently. So because of that, this dungeon is just the best. Not only that, you will be getting a stupid amount of gold from this dungeon. I think I'm walking out of the dungeon with about 100k to 150k raw gold every single run, and I get an absolutely full inventory of sacred and ancestral items every single run. And if I vendor all those, that's maybe around another 500,000 gold per run. So in total, with the speed that I can do this at, I'm farming somewhere around 1.5-ish million gold per hour, maybe even 2 million gold depending on how lucky I get on drops. But it's at least around 1.5 million gold per hour, which is absolutely insane. If we want to compare this to Nightmare Dungeons or Helltide, you're maybe making around 700k to 1 million gold an hour, as those methods aren't necessarily super fast unless you're doing low tier Helltide. But if you're doing, unless you're doing low tier Nightmare Dungeons, but if you're doing that, then you're not actually making much progress because you're not getting a lot of glyph XP and you're not really getting a lot of experience. And that is just a low estimate of it. I'm pretty sure this is probably closer to 2 million gold an hour, especially if you're efficient and especially if you are in a group, which means this is just substantially better than basically any other gold farming method in the game. And of course, since all of the gold comes from yellow items, this is the best source of yellow items in the game. So you are just getting more yellow items than anywhere else possible. So you're generating the biggest chance at getting upgrades. And if you're trying to sell your yellow items to other people, this is probably the best money per hour in the game period. Not only that, but the experience is insane. As I mentioned, experience comes from killing monsters, and most certainly elites make up a giant portion of it. And because we have around 30-ish elites in the first half of the dungeon, that means we're just getting massive chunks of experience. I, at around level 70 or so, was getting about 1/6 of a full level per run. So that means from the start all the way to the end of the bar. If you want to look at the experience I was gaining from point to point, so 1/4 of the bar, I was getting maybe around 2/3 of that per run. So I was getting 2/3 of a paragon point per run I was doing, which is really, really good XP. Maybe a little bit less. It really depended on how much I cleared. Sometimes I did do a full clear, sometimes I only did a half clear, but it's about 2/3 of a paragon point per run at around level 70. And the nice thing is this will scale no matter what you do. Now, again, I do want to mention I was at World Tier 4, now in World Tier 3. If you're doing this in World Tier 3, it'll be a little bit less XP, but it will still be the best experience in the game in World Tier 3 as well. And the nice thing is, as I was going to mention, that this scales with your level. So if you're level 80, the dungeon will scale to level 80. So these monsters will always proportionally give you the same amount of experience. It might be a little bit less because you're going to need more experience between each level, but it'll still be around 1/2 to 1/3 of a paragon point as you're pushing towards level 100. So where is this dungeon and how can we get to it? Well, all it is just right here. It is the Ruins of Eridu in Hazar. The closest waypoint to this is Vershez. This is a waypoint you get for clearing the stronghold. So you'd have to do this first before coming here the easy way, or you just come from the main city. It's not that far either, but we just want to make our way to Ruins of Eridu. So let's talk about the dungeon and what there actually is inside of it. So it's a 2-part dungeon. The first half is going to require you to clear the whole dungeon. And as soon as you do that, a barrier lifts, and then you can do the second half. The first half of the dungeon is always the same. There is a long tunnel that then leads you to 2 circles that are right next to each other. It kind of looks like an infinity sign is the best way to describe it, or a figure 8. And all you're going to do is you're just going to go in a giant loop through the infinity sign and clear the whole thing out. Now, as you're doing that, as I mentioned, about every quarter of the dungeon or so, you'll be ambushed by a pack of monsters. So just randomly have 3 to 4 elites spawn on top of you. On the right side as well, you will most of the time see a shrine. And sometimes on the left, you'll see a shrine as well. And if you get one of those and it has a good effect on it, that'll actually make you clear the dungeon a lot faster. And that massively increases your XP per hour. After you clear that, the second part will require you to kill 2 mini bosses before you can go to the main boss. But we're not going to worry about that. We're never going to complete the dungeon. And if you are solo, I would recommend to actually full clear and go do the second half of the dungeon too. Don't kill the mini bosses. They just take too long, but just clear a portion of the second half. Go towards the boss. You'll very quickly learn where the boss is because the second half of the dungeon, the layout is kind of always the same, but it changes a little bit, but you'll always know where the boss is. It's right next to the entrance from the first half of the dungeon. And there's always a few elite packs, sometimes in the corner right next to the boss. But if you clear just half of that, that's more than enough. The reason you want to do that as solo is because as soon as we're done with the dungeon, you're just going to use your remote wheel, immediately leave the dungeon. You are going to want to move a little bit. Don't forget about this. Move a little bit. Otherwise, you will spawn in town when you log out. But we're going to leave the dungeon, log out, log back in, and that's going to immediately reset the dungeon. And the problem here is we can't just do the first half. I mean, you could, but the problem is the loading time is just so high that you actually end up losing efficiency versus actually going into the second half of the dungeon and clearing that bit too as well. Unless you have a really fast computer and have super low loading times, or you just have a really fast clearing build to where it is worth it. If you're in a party, I would recommend to never do the second half of the dungeon. Just full clear the first half. Everyone just immediately leave the dungeon. You guys are then going to drop party, reform the party, and that will reset the dungeon. Because of that, because you guys don't have to log out and log back in, and you don't have to deal with the loading screen, it makes it substantially more efficient to just do the first half, which as a single player, because the loading screen of having to log out is not really as viable. What I would recommend is to go and abuse this as fast as you can. As I mentioned, no matter what, you are proportionally not going to get more experience anywhere else because you simply cannot find a greater density of elite monsters or realistically anything close to this in any other dungeon or in any other space in the game that will be as efficient as this to farm. So I would really recommend to go farm this, as we've seen other dungeons that are similar to this have been massively nerfed very quickly. So this might only last maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks before Blizzard decides, nope, we don't like this. Let's get rid of it. So have fun farming this and make a few million gold per hour and get quite a stupid amount of experience per hour while it lasts before Blizzard says no more. I know I'll be farming this for quite a little bit and I'll be using it to catch up since I've been playing quite a lot of hardcore. And I do want to play softcore now. So it's a really good way of catching up. That's a really good way to level your alt, since you can do this at any point you want. You can even do this in World Tier 3 if you really want to, and then move on to World Tier 4 as well. At any point, this is literally the place to currently be in the game. There's absolutely no efficient place to farm for rare items and for experience and for gold than this dungeon. That's all I really have for this video. I hope you guys have fun farming this. Hope you guys abuse it, and I hope you get quite rich off of it before it goes away. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I also stream on Twitch every single day. Feel free to come by and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions, or I'll just love if you come and hang out with me. But outside of that, I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.